Had God not been with Jesus on the cross, there would have been no resurrection from the tomb and no ascension. Only the power of God and the consciousness of Jesus could have brought about the resurrection. Had there been no God on that 40-year trek with Moses, there would have been no entrance to the Promised Land. There would have been no freedom for the Hebrews. Had there been no God with Joseph, there would have been no mounting up from slavery or virtually being the ruler of the great country of Egypt, and great it was in the day. Whatever the problem you are facing, try to realize this: you are not going through it alone. Even though it is the valley of the shadow of death, you need fear no evil, for God is with you. Consider that high concept of prayer. Quote, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." End quote. Whatever you are going through, there is a staff to lean upon, and there is a rod to keep you in line. There is some form of discipline. There is some form of teaching. There is some form of spiritual help. That spiritual help to lean upon. You must know this with all your knowing, and then act with the complete confidence in that knowing. Elijah nearly forgot that when he was fed by the ravens and the widow and found cakes beside baked on the stone, he nearly forgot that it was the presence of God that provided those things for him, nothing else, and that they were provided for him so that he also might successfully walk through the valley of the shadow of death and finally come to the place where God reveals to him that he was saved out of a congregation of 7,000 of those who did not bow on the knee to Baal. For you there is a congregation of 7,000. For you there is a spiritual mission, a spiritual purpose on earth, and the particular trial or tribulation through which you may now be going, or a whole series of them if necessary, is for the sole purpose of leading you to your ultimate demonstration, something that you could not have done without that particular trial or tribulation. This is the way of the cross. It is the way of the cross. But notice that the cross comes long after the crucifixion. First, the crucifixion comes, and many of them. And for this reason, the person enters the spiritual path must understand that, quote, "I come not to bring peace but a sword, to divide every household," end of quote, to break up everything that would give you ease and comfort in material circumstances and conditions. There can be no spiritual progress until you have overcome the world. As long as you are using truth merely to increase your human good, increase your weekly income, remodel your home, acquire a better automobile, you have not even touched the spiritual path. In each case of the Hebrew prophets, you will notice that their mission was not a personal one. Their mission was not just of one human being doing good or just adding a human good to the world. It was always a spiritual mission. The same is true of you. You have a spiritual mission, whether at this moment you know it or not. Everyone has a spiritual mission, and everyone ultimately will find it. Once you have entered this spiritual path, there is no way to turn back. You may try to try to do it temporarily, but you will be driven and forced back into the spiritual path once there is this, quote, "Thou art with me," end of quote. Quote, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me," end of quote. Then it is said, quote, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over." End of quote. Here again is simply the statement of that which is. Thou preparest a table. No affirmation to come to make one true, no petition, no seeking God, merely a statement. This is a high prayer. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Then, quote, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." End of quote. How confident he is, quote, "Surely goodness and mercy." End of quote. There is another important thought there also, quote, "all the days of my life." End of quote. Once you realize that God cannot operate today and not have tomorrow, you have touched one of the highest concepts of prayer. If you can acknowledge that any time in your experience you have known the result of prayer, that is, you have had a healing through the spiritual means, or if at any time in your life you have had an evidence of the presence of the power of God, actually, you should never have to be concerned again, because that one evidence to you of God's presence should be enough to make you say, quote, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." End of quote. All the days. How can God be with you today and not tomorrow? How can God manifest or express itself one day and not the next? The Hebrews had a hard time learning that lesson. They insisted on picking manna for tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. Moses had to remind them that if that manna was falling out of the sky by the grace of God, why should they think that it wouldn't fall tomorrow and the day after? Why should God stop as long as there was a need? Is there a possibility that God would stop your blessings as long as you have a need? Is it possible that the hand of God is shortened or will be withdrawn from you before the fulfillment of your destiny? Why should you ever have to question? Why should you ever have to treat? Meditate on the spirit of the 23rd Psalm, a psalm that is in no wise, no place, reaches out to God, seeks anything from God, but rather rests so completely, so perfectly in the confidence, the assurance, quote, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life." End of quote. Then comes the conclusion, quote, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." End of quote. Quote, "I will dwell," end of quote, "in God's consciousness," quote, "forever." End of quote. There is no treatment about it, just a statement, quote, "And I will dwell," end of quote, "in God's consciousness," quote, "in the house of the Lord forever," end of quote. That may be a cue for you Have you made the declaration, quote, I will dwell in the house of the Lord, end quote, forever